The Winchester cracked like thunder across the desert, and Jack Steele dropped. He hit the dirt hard, grit and blood mixing on his temple, as lead split the air right where his head had been a second before. He didn't have to look. He knew his horse was down, poor Bess, 10 yards back with her life pouring into the Arizona dust. 8 men, circling him like vultures, 6 bullets left in his Colt, a quarter-mile of open, shimmering ground between him and the Dragoon Spring Station, a dead man's run. Morrison's voice rolled across the canyon, slick with hate. "Come on out, Iron Jack. You killed my brother. Time to pay your tab." Jack didn't bother answering. Talk was cheap when lead was in the air. He'd stopped being a smart man the day he put on a cavalry uniform. He'd stopped being a lucky man the day he rode out of Tucson. Now he was just a running man, and he was about to make a dead man's run. He broke cover. The world exploded in gunfire behind him, bullets kicking up dust devils at his heels. He ran like the hounds of hell were chasing him, because they were. Up ahead, smoke curled from a stone chimney. A figure stepped onto the porch of the station. A woman. Her hair caught the blazing sun and lit up like a torch. She just stood there, watching death come sprinting toward her door. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She didn't even flinch as Jack hit the ground, sliding behind a water trough just as bullets chewed splinters from the porch post right above her head. She just shaded her eyes, watching him bleed into her yard. Her voice cut through the gunfire. "Calm as you please. You running from them or just running toward more trouble?" Jack pressed a hand to his side, feeling the warm stickiness. "Both, ma'am. Always both." He tried to get his breath, to figure his next move. But she was already stepping down from the porch, moving with a grace that didn't belong in this god-forsaken dust bowl. "The name's Catherine Morgan," she said, her green eyes sizing him up like he was a horse she was thinking of buying. "And I know who you are, Iron Jack Steele. $500 bounty on your head. Makes a man memorable." Morrison's voice echoed again, closer this time. "We know you're in there, Jack. Send him out, woman, or we'll burn the whole damn place to the ground with you in it." Catherine didn't even look toward the rocks. Her lips curved into a smile that wasn't friendly. It was sharp. It was dangerous. "Mr. Steele," she said, her voice low, "can you shoot?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can you kill?" The question hung there in the shimmering heat. It wasn't about morals. It was about survival. Jack met her gaze. "When I have to." She gave a slow nod, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Then we best get you patched up, unless you'd rather bleed out in my yard." The inside of the cabin smelled of coffee, gunpowder, and something else. Something clean and floral that was just her. It was cooler, the thick adobe walls holding back the worst of the sun's fury. Catherine moved like a dancer, gathering bandages from a low chest. The blue cotton of her dress was damp with sweat, clinging to her hips and the curve of her spine as she bent over. "Shirt off," she said, not even looking at him. Jack hesitated for a second. It had been a long time since he'd been this close to a woman like her. "Ma'am, I—" She turned then, her eyes sweeping over him, taking in the dust, the blood, the hard miles etched on his face. "I've seen wounded men before, Mr. Steele. Modesty is a luxury we don't have time for." He pulled the ruined shirt off. Her gaze lingered on the old scars that crisscrossed his chest and shoulders, a roadmap of a hard life. "My," she murmured, a hint of that dangerous smile playing on her lips again. "You've collected quite a gallery." Her fingers were gentle, cleaning the wound on his side, but her touch was electric. It sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with the pain. This close, he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Her hands stilled for a heartbeat. "Let's just say I have my reasons." "The bounty?" She laughed, a low, husky sound that did strange things to the air in the small room. $500 is good money, but dead men can't return favors." She went back to tying the bandage, her knuckles brushing against his skin. "What kind of favors?" She looked up, her green eyes locking with his. "The kind that require a man who can shoot straight and doesn't ask too many questions." Outside, the scrape of a boot on rock. Morrison's men were getting impatient. They were repositioning, getting ready for the final push. Jack had faced down Apache war parties and Mexican banditos, But he had a feeling the most dangerous person in this canyon was standing right in front of him. Catherine finished with the bandage and moved to a cabinet, pulling out a bottle of whiskey and two glasses. Her dress had slipped off one shoulder, revealing the pale, smooth curve of her collarbone. "There's something you should know," she said, pouring the amber liquid. "I'm listening." She handed him a glass, her fingers brushing his. "I'm not the helpless widow this town thinks I am." "What are you, then?" Her smile was back, full of secrets. "I'm a businesswoman, Mr. Steele. I supply certain goods to certain people. Goods that need to cross borders without a lot of official paperwork." She raised her glass. "Guns, among other things." The whiskey burned going down, but not as much as the realization that he'd run from a pack of wolves right into a lion's den. He was trapped. Trapped between Morrison's guns outside and a woman who dealt in weapons and secrets. "They'll come at sunset," Catherine said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She moved to the window, peering out through a crack in the shutters. "Morrison likes to watch the sky bleed while he does his work. Gives him time to think about all the ways he's going to kill you." Jack watched her silhouette against the dusty light. The setting sun caught the edges of her hair, making it look like she was crowned in fire. "You seem to know an awful lot about him." She turned from the window, her face unreadable. "I know his type. Men who think violence is the only language the world understands. They're predictable." She walked over and sat on the edge of the narrow bed, the mattress dipping beside him. The heat of her body was a palpable thing. "The real question, Mr. Steele, is do you want to live through the night? That's a fool question. Then you need to decide what you're willing to pay." Her hand came to rest on his knee, her fingers light but firm through the worn denim. The casual touch sent another jolt straight through him. "I don't have anything but a bounty on my head and the clothes on my back," he said. "Oh, I think you do," she purred. Her fingers began to trace slow circles on his thigh. "Help me with one job, one run across the border. Get my cargo where it needs to go. After that, we disappear. Split the profits. You get a new life, and I get to keep mine." Her eyes held his, and in their green depths he saw a wilderness that matched the desert outside. He saw promises and dangers all tangled up together. "And if I say no, then Morrison kills you, and I have to deal with him myself. I'd rather have you on my side. For a little while, at least." Her smile was pure temptation. "Besides, it could be fun." A low rumble started in the distance. It wasn't thunder. The sky was clear as glass. It was a sound Jack knew all too well. Hoofbeats, dozens of them, riding hard. Catherine was at the window in an instant. Her whole body went rigid. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Jack was beside her, peering through the shutter. A line of riders was cresting the far ridge, coming down into the canyon fast. They weren't Morrison's men. They were painted for war. "Apache," she breathed, and for the first time, he heard real fear in her voice. "They're not supposed to be here for 3 more days." Jack's blood ran cold. He had 6 bullets left. Morrison had 7 men dug into the rocks, and now a war party was bearing down on them, like the wrath of God. They were caught in a vice. "Friends of yours?" Jack asked, his hand instinctively going to his Colt. "Business partners," she hissed, her face pale. "But something's gone terribly wrong." The Apache were closing the distance with terrifying speed. Any minute now, this tiny cabin was going to be the center of a 3-way war. Jack looked from the approaching warriors to the woman beside him. He saw the fear in her eyes, but underneath it, something else was stirring. A wild, reckless light that matched the fire in her hair. She turned to face him, her back to the window. "Well, Mr. Steele," she whispered, a strange, feral grin spreading across her face. "Looks like hell decided to arrive a little early today." The world outside erupted into a chorus of war cries. The Apache hit the station like a flash flood. An arrow, thick as his thumb, punched through the shutter and buried itself in the wall right where his head had been. Splinters of wood exploded into the room. Catherine didn't even blink. She was already moving, diving for the bed and pulling a heavy Winchester rifle from underneath. She worked the lever with a practiced motion that sent a chill down Jack's spine. This was not a helpless widow. This was a predator. "Back door!" she yelled over the chaos. But it was too late. The front door burst inward, kicked off its leather hinges. An Apache warrior, his face a mask of red and black paint, came through in a low crouch, a tomahawk gleaming in his hand. Jack's Colt bucked in his fist. The single shot was deafening in the small cabin. The warrior spun backward, a look of surprise on his face, and fell out into the unforgiving sunlight. Before the body even hit the ground, another warrior was coming through the kitchen doorway. Catherine's Winchester roared, and the second man dropped like a stone. Then an unnerving silence fell. The war cries stopped. The shooting stopped. It was the kind of quiet that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. They were out there, waiting, circling. 6 warriors, Jack said, his back pressed to the wall. 2 down, 4 to go. He didn't bother mentioning Morrison's men. 1 fire at a time. They want the guns, Catherine whispered. She was reloading the Winchester, her movements quick and sure. The fight had torn her dress at the shoulder, revealing the smooth, sun-kissed skin beneath. Even with death scratching at the door, she was a sight to behold. What guns? She met his eyes, and the secret was finally out. The ones in the root cellar, under the kitchen floor. A crate of 60 brand new rifles, and enough ammunition to start a war, or finish one. Suddenly, Morrison's obsession with this place made a whole lot more sense. This wasn't about his brother. It was never about his brother. It was about a hidden arsenal that could make a man a king in this territory. A shadow flickered past the back window. Jack tracked it, his pistol held steady. The warrior was smart, using the cover of the well, moving slowly. But Jack had spent years in the cavalry fighting men just like him. He knew the patterns. He knew the rhythm of the fight. The warrior came through the back door, low and fast, knife in his hand. Jack fired. The bullet took the man high in the chest, but he was tough. He stayed on his feet long enough to throw his knife. It wasn't an arrow, but it was just as deadly. The blade sliced across Jack's ribs, a line of pure fire that stole his breath. He staggered back, his vision swimming for a second. 3 left, Catherine said. She was suddenly right beside him, pressing him back against the wall, her body a warm, solid presence in the chaos. We have to move. They'll burn us out next. As if her words had summoned it, the smell of smoke began to snake through the broken windows. A hellish orange glow began to flicker, painting dancing shadows on the walls. The cabin was turning into a furnace. The cellar, she said, grabbing his arm. Now! She half dragged him into the kitchen, kicking aside a bearskin rug to reveal a heavy wooden trapdoor. She heaved it open, revealing a set of steep steps leading down into the cool darkness. The smoke was getting thicker, stinging their eyes, choking them. The root cellar was bigger than he expected, cool and smelling of damp earth and gun oil. It was carved right out of the desert bedrock. In the flickering light of the match Catherine struck, Jack saw them. Crate after crate of rifles, boxes of ammunition, and something else. Something that made his blood run cold. Stamped on the side of every crate was a seal, the eagle and the snake, the official mark of the Mexican army. Jesus, Catherine, he breathed, what in God's name have you gotten yourself into? She looked at him, her face smudged with soot, her eyes burning with defiance in the small flame. It's called survival, Mr. Steele. Out here, you're either the predator or you're the prey. I made my choice a long time ago. Footsteps creaked on the floorboards above them. The remaining Apache were inside the cabin now, searching. The smoke was pouring down the stairs, a thick, greasy cloud. They were running out of time. There's another way out, she said, grabbing a lantern and lighting it. A tunnel. My husband dug it. Connects to an old played-out silver mine. She led him deeper into the cellar, to a section of wall that looked like solid rock. But it wasn't. It was a cleverly hidden door. The tunnel was narrow and claustrophobic. Catherine went first, the lantern swinging in her hand, casting their shadows long and distorted on the rough-hewn walls. They could hear the roar of the fire above them, the crack and groan of the cabin's timbers giving way. They emerged from the mine shaft 50 yards from the station, hidden behind a jumble of massive boulders. The entire cabin was engulfed in flames, a funeral pyre reaching for the twilight sky. Everything she owned, Everything she had built was turning to ash. "My God," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jack put a hand on her shoulder. "We're alive, Catherine. That's a start." She turned to face him. The firelight danced in her eyes, reflecting the destruction. He saw loss there, and rage, and something else. Something raw and vulnerable that hadn't been there before. "They destroyed my life's work," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "We'll build a new one," he said, not knowing if it was true but needing to say it anyway. "Will we?" She stepped closer, so close he could feel the heat of her breath on his face. "What do we have left, Jack Steele? What do either of us have?" Before he could answer, her mouth was on his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fierce and desperate, a raw, primal need to feel something other than loss and fear. It was the kiss of two people who had just walked through fire and found each other on the other side. Her hands were in his hair, pulling him closer, her body pressing against his. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet, his own desperation matching hers. They came together there in the dust and the shadows, with the ruins of her life burning behind them and enemies hiding in the rocks all around. It was reckless. It was madness. It was the most alive he had felt in years. Her torn dress fell away, and in the flickering firelight, her skin was the color of moonlight. It was a collision of solace and desperation, two survivors finding a moment of grace in the heart of the inferno. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the shelter of the rocks. Her fiery hair was spilled across his chest, and her breathing was slow and even against his skin. The fire was dying down now, leaving behind a skeleton of charred timbers against the star-dusted sky. The world was quiet again, but it was a dangerous quiet. "Morrison's still out there," Jack said, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "I know." Catherine's fingers traced the oldest scar on his chest, a jagged line from a cavalry saber. "He won't give up, not with 60 rifles buried under those ashes. The Apache will be back too," he said, "and they'll bring friends." She lifted her head, her green eyes seeming to glow in the dark. "So what do we do?" Jack looked at the smoldering ruins, then back at her face. Fierce, beautiful, dangerous. She was the desert embodied, wild and unpredictable. He knew in that moment that he would follow her straight back into the fire if she asked him to. "We finish this," he said, "tonight." But as he said it, he felt a knot of ice form in his stomach, because he was hiding a secret of his own, a secret about his time in the cavalry, and a ghost that connected him to the very Apache warriors who were hunting them. He had a debt to pay, and the bill was about to come due. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath. The dawn came slow and gray, painting the undersides of the clouds in shades of bruised purple and blood orange. Morrison didn't wait for the sun to clear the mountains. He came with the half-light, and he brought his whole damn army with him. Jack counted 8 riders moving through the morning mist, the 7 he'd seen before, plus one more. They rode with the grim purpose of men who were there to finish a job. Catherine was pressed against him in their hiding spot, a shallow cave tucked into the side of the canyon. She was wearing his spare shirt, the tails knotted at her waist. It barely covered her, and the sight of her long, lean legs and the curve of her hips made his mouth go dry, even with death on the horizon. "We can't outrun them," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "Don't intend to," he said, checking the loads in his Colt. 4 bullets left. Catherine had the Winchester and a handful of shells she'd managed to grab from the cellar. It wasn't much, but sometimes it wasn't about the odds. It was about how much you were willing to bleed to see the next sunrise. Morrison reined in his horse near the smoldering ruins. He dismounted, his black duster swirling around his boots. Even from a distance, Jack could see the cruel twist of his mouth. He thought he'd won. He thought they were dead or scattered. "Jack Steele!" His voice boomed, bouncing off the canyon walls. "I know you're still breathing. I can smell the fear on you." Jack started to move to rise up, but Catherine's hand shot out and grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Wait," she hissed. "Not yet. Come on out and I'll make it quick for you," Morrison yelled. "But if you make me hunt you down, well, I'll take my time. Maybe I'll start with that red-headed witch of yours." A fire ignited in Catherine's eyes that had nothing to do with the rising sun. It was pure, distilled rage. "Nobody calls me that," she growled. "Easy," Jack cautioned, but he understood. In this land, a person's name, their reputation, was all they had. Morrison had just spit on hers. It was a declaration of war. Morrison gestured to his men. "Spread out, check every rock, every crevice. Find them." And that's when Catherine smiled. It was a chilling sight, a predator's smile. It made Jack's own blood run a little cold. "I saved a little something from the fire," she whispered. She reached into the folds of the shirt she was wearing and pulled out a single thick stick of dynamite. A long fuse dangled from one end. "My husband, the one before the one the Apache supposedly killed. He was a mining man," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "He left me some insurance." "Catherine, that's insane," Jack said. "It's too risky." "Everything about this is risky, Jack." She leaned in and kissed him, a soft, lingering press of her lips against his. It felt like a goodbye. "Trust me." Before he could say another word, she was gone. She moved from their hiding place with the silence and grace of a mountain lion, melting into the labyrinth of red rock formations that the locals called Devil's Garden. Morrison's men shouted as they caught a glimpse of her, raising their rifles, but she vanished as quickly as she had appeared. Jack had no choice. He followed her into the maze. It was a nightmare landscape of twisted sandstone spires and shadowed canyons. Catherine led them on a deadly chase, appearing for a moment on a high ledge, then disappearing again, drawing Morrison's men deeper and deeper into the confusing terrain. She knew this ground. She was a ghost, and they were clumsy fools stumbling after her. Jack became a ghost too. He let them pass, then rose up from the shadows. His first shot took a heavy-set outlaw in the back. He dropped without a sound. His second shot caught a younger man in the leg. He screamed, and that scream drew another rider into the open. Catherine's Winchester cracked from a ridge above, and the second man fell. 6 left. Morrison was screaming orders, his voice raw with frustration. He was trying to keep his men together, but the maze was breaking them apart, isolating them. In this place, numbers meant nothing. Knowledge of the terrain was everything. Suddenly, Catherine appeared on a ledge directly above Morrison. The morning sun framed her, making her hair look like a halo of fire. In one hand, she held the stick of dynamite. In the other, a lit match. "Morrison!" she called out, her voice clear and strong. "You wanted to play with fire?" The outlaw leader looked up, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. For the first time, he was seeing the woman, not the victim. He was seeing the predator. "You're making a big mistake, lady," he snarled. "The mistake was she yelled back. "You burned down my home. You burned down my life. Let me return the favor." She touched the match to the fuse. It sputtered to life, a hissing, angry snake of smoke and sparks. Then she dropped it. The explosion was apocalyptic. It wasn't just loud. It was a physical force that shook the very foundations of the canyon. Half a cliff face sheared away, a wave of rock and dust crashing down into the narrow passage where Morrison's men were trapped. 2 of them disappeared instantly, swallowed by the earth. The others were thrown from their horses, blinded and choking. In the swirling chaos of dust and confusion, Jack made his move. He came up behind a scarred man named Hayes, Morrison's second in command, and silenced him with the cold efficiency the cavalry had taught him. No sound, no warning, just a quiet end. The dust began to settle. Catherine's Winchester spoke again from the smoke, and another man went down. And then, there were 2. Jack stood at one end of the rock-strewn canyon. 20 yards away, Morrison struggled to his feet, his face bleeding from a dozen small cuts. His men were gone. Dead or fled, it didn't matter. "Always comes down to this, doesn't it?" Morrison rasped, his hand hovering over the butt of his pistol. "Just 2 men." "It doesn't have to," Jack said, his own hand steady. "Ride out. Don't come back." Morrison laughed, a broken, ugly sound. "You killed my brother, Steele. You think I can just ride away?" And that's when Jack decided to lay his own cards on the table. The secret that had been eating at him. "Your brother," Jack said, his voice cold and hard. He wasn't just some outlaw. He was leading a raid on an Apache settlement near the border. Women, children. He wasn't just killing them, Morrison. Morrison's face went blank. I was still in the cavalry then, Jack continued. My troop was supposed to support him. An unsanctioned mission. A massacre. I refused the order. Me and a few of my men, we stopped him. Your brother died because he was a monster. Liar! Morrison screamed, his face contorting with rage. But Jack could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Ask yourself why the Apache are here now, Jack said quietly. Maybe they're not just here for the guns. Shut up! Morrison shrieked, and his hand went for his gun. He was fast, wickedly fast. His bullet caught Jack in the shoulder, a sledgehammer blow that spun him around and sent his Colt flying from his numb fingers. He fell to his knees, the world turning gray at the edges. Morrison walked toward him, his pistol smoking, a triumphant sneer on his face. He leveled the barrel at Jack's forehead. Any last words, Iron Jack? Jack looked up, past Morrison's shoulder, to the ridgeline above, and he smiled through the pain. Yeah, he coughed. Duck. A single rifle shot echoed through the canyon. It was so perfectly timed it was like it was part of the conversation. Morrison's head snapped back, as if pulled by an invisible string. A small, dark hole appeared right between his eyes. He stood there for a long second, a statue of surprise before crumbling to the ground in a boneless heap. Silence, complete and total. Jack looked up to see Catherine climbing down from her perch on the ridge, the Winchester held loosely in her hand. She knelt beside him, her expression a mixture of concern and exhaustion. It'll heal, she said, gently probing the wound in his shoulder. We both will. He looked at her, then at the bodies scattered through Devil's Garden. He looked at the smoking ruins of her home. Where do we go from here, Catherine? Everything you had is gone. She followed his gaze, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she turned back to him, and her green eyes held a clarity he'd never seen before. Not everything, she said softly. She helped him to his feet, her arm around his waist, supporting him. But as they stood there, a new sound reached them. Not gunfire, not horses. It was a single low voice speaking in the Apache tongue. They turned. On the ridge opposite, where Catherine had been, a lone figure stood. An old man, his face a mask of weathered lines, his hair long and gray. He wasn't painted for war. He held a single, unadorned lance. It was the Apache leader, and he was staring directly at Catherine. He knows, Jack said, his blood turning to ice. The leader must have seen her red hair, her green eyes. Catherine didn't look afraid. She looked sad. She let go of Jack and took a single step forward. She raised her hand, palm out, a sign of peace. Then she spoke, her voice carrying in the still morning air. And she didn't speak in English. She spoke in perfect Apache. Jack didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was the sound of a daughter speaking to her father. The old warrior stood on the ridge, a silhouette against the rising sun, his face unreadable. He had seen everything. He had seen the dynamite. He had seen Catherine kill Morrison's men. He had seen her save Jack's life. He listened as she spoke, her voice echoing in the canyon, a long, sorrowful explanation. Jack finally understood. The Apache weren't her business partners. They were her people. Her father had come not to trade, but to stop her, to bring her home from a path he could not approve of. Her dealing with stolen Mexican army guns was a betrayal of everything he stood for. When she finished speaking, a heavy silence fell over Devil's Garden. The old chief stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Then he looked at Jack, his dark eyes seeming to pierce right through to his soul. He recognized him. Jack knew it instantly. The chief recognized the cavalry soldier who had defied his orders and saved his village all those years ago. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the three of them, bound together by a history of blood and fire and a debt that could never truly be repaid. The chief spoke one word in Apache. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing over the ridge. The rest of his warriors, hidden in the rocks, melted away with him. They were gone as silently as they had arrived. Catherine turned back to Jack, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks. What did he say? Jack asked. He said the debt is paid, she whispered. He said I am no longer his daughter. I am dead to him. The victory felt like ashes in their mouths. They had survived, but in the process, Catherine had lost the only family she had left. She had chosen him, a broken gunslinger with a bounty on his head, over her own blood. They stood there for a long time, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the rocks. The sun was higher now, baking the canyon, but they both felt cold. What I told Morrison, Jack said finally, his voice hoarse, about his brother, about your people, it was the truth. I know, she said, not looking at him. My father told me the story of the blue-coat soldier who showed honor when all others showed savagery. I never knew it was you. The revelation hung between them, another ghost in a canyon full of them. He had saved her family, and now she had saved him, but in doing so, had been cast out by that same family. The irony was a bitter pill. There's still the matter of the guns, Jack said quietly. 60 rifles are still buried under there. The Mexican army will come looking for them. They won't give up as easily as Morrison. Catherine finally looked at him, and the fierce light was back in her eyes, tempered now by a profound sadness. No, she said, they're not our guns anymore. She walked over to the smoldering ruins of her home. The ground was still hot, but she didn't seem to notice. She began digging with her bare hands in the ash and charred earth above where the root cellar had been. Jack, his shoulders screaming in protest, joined her. It took them over an hour, but they finally cleared enough debris to wrench open the scorched trapdoor. The cellar was intact, the thick earth having protected it from the worst of the fire. The crates were still there, a small fortune, a new life. But Catherine didn't look at them with greed. She looked at them with disgust. Together, they hauled one of the heavy crates up out of the cellar and dragged it out into the open. Then another, and another. It was brutal, exhausting work. When they were done, 20 of the 60 rifles were piled in the dust. Catherine looked toward the ridge where her father had disappeared. This is my dowry, she said, her voice choked with emotion. A gift to my people. Something to protect them from the next man like Morrison. It was a gesture of peace, an apology, a daughter's last, heartbreaking gift. And the rest? Jack asked. Her lips twisted into a grim smile. The rest are a message. They worked through the afternoon, under the relentless sun. They took the remaining 40 rifles and all the ammunition and carried them back into the narrowest part of Devil's Garden, the very spot where she had dropped the dynamite. They packed the crates tightly into the passage, then piled rocks on top of them. From the ruins of the cabin, they salvaged a small barrel of lantern oil that had miraculously survived the fire. Catherine poured it all over the rocks and the wooden crates. She had one stick of dynamite left. This is it, she said, looking at him. Once this is done, there's no turning back, no money, no guns, nothing but what we can carry. It's more than I had yesterday, Jack said, and he meant it. He reached out and touched her face, his fingers gently wiping away a smudge of soot from her cheek. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, she whispered. She lit the fuse. They ran. The second explosion was even bigger than the first. It collapsed the entire canyon passage, burying the 40 rifles and the Mexican army's ambitions under 100 tons of red rock. The sound echoed for miles, a final, definitive period at the end of a bloody chapter. They didn't look back. They found the outlaws' horses, took the 2 best ones, and rode west. They rode until the red dust of Arizona gave way to the brown hills of California. They rode until they could smell salt on the wind. 3 months later, Jack Steele stood on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The water was a shade of blue so deep it hurt the eyes. The bullet wound in his shoulder was just a pale scar now, but he knew some wounds never really healed. They just became a part of you. The door of the small cabin he'd built with his own hands opened, and Catherine came out, carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. She wasn't wearing a gun belt anymore. She wore a simple calico dress, and the sea breeze played with her fiery hair. She was still the most magnificent, dangerous thing he had ever seen. She handed him a cup and stood beside him, their shoulders touching. They watched the waves crash against the rocks below, a steady, endless rhythm of power and peace. Any regrets? She asked quietly. Jack thought about the trail of bodies they had left behind them. He thought about the fire and the blood and the choices that could never be unmade. He thought about the fortune and guns they had left buried under a mountain. About Morrison? No. About leaving that life behind? Not a one, he said. He took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing with hers. About finding you in the middle of all that hell? Never. She leaned her head on his good shoulder, and for the first time since he'd met her, she seemed completely at peace. The shadows were gone from her eyes. I never thanked you, Jack, she murmured. For what? For seeing the woman I could be, not just the one I was. Down in the small fishing village below, a church bell began to ring, its clear, simple notes carrying up to them on the wind. It was a sound of hope, a sound of new beginnings. Think we'll make it? Catherine asked, her voice so soft he could barely hear it over the waves. Two broken people trying to build something whole. Jack squeezed her hand and looked out at the endless horizon. Catherine, he said, we already have. A red-tailed hawk soared overhead, catching a thermal and climbing into the vast clear sky. It circled once, then headed out over the ocean, free. If this story of a gunslinger's redemption and a fire-haired woman's sacrifice moved you, do me a favor and hit that like button. And if you want more tales from the untamed West, stories of desperate choices and second chances, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments below, what does the word freedom really mean to you?